Today we're going to take a deep dive into using regular expressions or regex in Search Console. So for those of you who are working in the search industry, this is a really helpful tool. For years, we were not able to use regex in Search Console, which really limited us because you had to search for one or two items at a time. Where this enhanced functionality is particularly useful is in sifting out brand terms from generic terms. And that's where this tool really comes in handy, especially for larger brands. You might have multiple terms that you've identified as brand terms, and you might want to either just look at those or more often than not, look at terms that don't include those keywords. And so let's take a dive into this. So Google announced this in April of this year. And then in June, they added the ability to choose doesn't match regex. So you can choose matches regex or does not match regex. So that even added more functionality. So how do we use this? And I'll drop links to each of these pages that I'm showing, but Google does have a help page that talks a little bit about the regular expression filter. But I feel like by the time you get to the end of this video, you'll understand how to use it. Okay, so where can we use regex? It's in this search results report under performance. So first, let me talk a little bit about how this report works, because this is actually a really elegant report, but a lot of times people don't get the full functionality of it. So it defaults to queries, and queries is just geek speak for keywords. And here I can see a list of my top keywords, the impressions. So that's just how many times it showed up in a search. So typically these are only going to be page one impressions because not too many people click through to the second page. However, you can add additional metrics by just selecting these additional metrics, and then you can see them in your table as well, even though it kind of trashes the timeline. We will deselect those, but there are times where I just select and deselect. You have to have one selected, but I might just look at like total impressions and then average click-through rate or average position. So you have some options there. I changed this to the full 16 months. I think it defaults to the last 3 months. We'll just keep the 16 months just so I can have more data. Need to move this. Okay. So first of all, the thing to understand here is any filters you apply are applied up here. Now, you're not limited to just filtering by queries. You can filter by pages, you can filter by countries, devices, search appearance, or dates. And when you apply a filter, it's sticky. So any report that you look at, you are only going to see the results for what you've filtered. And we'll see how that looks. Okay. So you apply a filter by clicking on this plus sign and new, and then choosing what you want to filter. So the regex options are only offered through query and page. Unfortunately, you don't have the option in country. It would be nice because then you could filter for like an entire continent or something like that. But you know, crawl, walk, run. I'm thrilled that we can use regex for queries and pages. So we will open up the query option, and the way to get the regex option is just to click on this drop down here and choose custom regex. Then when you select that, you have the option to use matches regex or doesn't match regex. So let's say that I want to start with filtering out my brand terms. Then I would choose doesn't match regex, and I can put in Annie, and I could say Annie or Analytics, and by wrapping lytics in these brackets and then putting a question mark, that just says that that part of the regular expression is optional. Now, if this is Greek to you, then you'll want to check out my other videos on regular expressions. I did an intro video that really covers all of the basics of regular expressions, and I will link to that in the description. But one thing you'll want to do is kind of bounce back and forth between matches regex and does not matches regex to make sure you got everything. Like I said, my brand is pretty straightforward. It's just Annie and Analytics. But for larger brands, you might have lots of different micro brand keywords. And so this regex for larger brands is going to be a lot more inclusive of different keywords. And it's a good opportunity to practice your regex. But if I open this up and I see keywords that shouldn't be in there, then that will be an indicator I need to lock my regex down a little bit more. And then once you have the regex that you need, then where this really comes in handy is to be able to drop this into some kind of ETL tool like Supermetrics or Stitch or something like that, and grab this data via the Search Console API. So what I'll typically do is send the data to BigQuery on a daily basis and then query that data. And so I'll test my regex in the tool for a particular client. And once I kind of have the regex exactly as I want it, then I'll drop it into, a BigQuery query or, something like that. So any tool that accepts regex, you can use this regex in. If nothing else, it's a great way to experiment. So I'm going to go back to doesn't match regex. And now that I have just my generic terms, if I look at pages, I'm going to see the pages on my site that get most of the impressions and clicks for generic keywords. And I could compare that to pages that are receiving most of the traffic for my brand terms. I could also look at the countries that are generating most of the traffic to my generic keywords. So there's quite a bit that you could do with this. And one thing that would be good to mention here is in Search Console, the regex is by default, it's a partial match. So if I wanted it to be exact match, then I would need to include something like the character and the $sign, which means the query can only be Annie or Analytics. And if I put that in and then I go back to queries, I'm going to change this back to matches regex. And if I drop that in, I should only see Annie or Analytics. Okay, so I could also go in there and I could say Annie or Annie Cushing. And I can make Cushing optional. Let's see what that does. There we go. Now, Search Console also gives you the ability to make a query case sensitive. The characters you would need to use are parentheses, then a question mark, a hyphen, and a lowercase I. So if I wanted to only see queries that match Annie with a capital A, this isn't going to work because most people don't use capital letters. But if you wanted to differentiate, you could do that. You just have to take note of this notation here, which is also in the help file. I'm not going to run it because, like I said, my site doesn't use it. It's not going to be helpful with the query so much, but it could be helpful with pages. Like if you have a page that has capital letters and you don't want it to match lowercase, that could be useful. Okay, so let's see what else we can do here. Let's say I wanted to only look at keywords that contained a digit. So the regex for digit is \d, lowercase d. These are case sensitive. And if I put that in here, then I will only see keywords that contain a digit. Alternatively, if I wanted to filter them out, I could either say doesn't match regex, or I could use a capital D, and then that just means anything but a digit. Okay, and how else can we use this? Let's say you want to see keywords that contain some kind of question: how, what, when, where, why. So we could type that in here. We could say how. Now, when you think of what, when, where, why, they have characters in common. So if you want to be a fancy pants, you could do something like this. How, what, where, when, why. So this just communicates I want to only see keywords that contain how and then a WH, and then after the WH either AT, ERE, EN, or Y. And let's see what that does. And let's look at more rows. We'll do 100. But let's say that you get something that doesn't really make sense. Like there must be something in here. Yes, here the match is right here. So let's say you want the query. This is all about locking down your regex to get exactly what you want. So we could do something like this where we put a character, and that will just indicate the query needs to start with one of these keywords. Now, if you're a site like mine that does a lot of tutorials, this report is gold. Now, I've largely abandoned my site for the past year. I explained that in my last tutorial, so I'm not going to go into that more. But you can see here, I do receive quite a few searches for how, because I have a lot of tutorials teaching marketers and analysts how to perform different tasks. So perfect. So let's see what we can do next. Last year, my site received quite a bit of traffic for a criminal case that some of my family members were victims of. So you might see something like this. And the only reason I'm using these as examples is at least there are some real world applications that apply to marketing. So there was a little boy named JJ, and sometimes his name is spelled like this, and sometimes it's spelled like this, J, and then J period, J period. But let's say that I want to include both references. Then what I could do is, let me see if I can, I'll just zoom in here. So I could do something like this. If I want to use a period, and this is what I just wanted to kind of provide a refresher on why I'm using this as an example. If I want it to match a period and not treat the period as a regex character, which as a regex character, it just means any one character, then what we have to do is escape it. And we do that by putting a backslash in front of it. But let's say that is optional, then we could do something like this, where we put the question mark, and then we have another J. And if I apply that, we should see, I'm going to zoom back out now. We should see matches for both with and without the period. So I'll just see here, J period. I think I have to apply a few more. There we go. Now it matches J period J. Now let's say for me, I just wanted to see performance for searches around my family's case. Then I could do something like this, where I could just expand the query to match Tylee. A lot of times Tylee is auto-corrected to Tyler, so we could add that in to account for those times. And we could add in Glory, Valo, Ryan. Now, I would want to first look at matches regex just to see, is there anything that shouldn't be there? And no, everything looks solid. So let's say I want to expand it to also contain my brother's name, and he's sometimes referred to as Joe or Joseph. So I could do something like this. And in fact, I am going to save that. Let me see. And we're going to run a test here. So this could be, oops, Joe with an E or SEPH. Let's apply that and see what happens. And you see there are different Josephs because there are different characters involved in this whole story whose name is Joseph. So I could go in here and lock this down even more by saying it will contain Joe or Joseph. Then there could be other characters, but then there's going to be Ryan. And now I'm only looking at Joe or Joseph Ryan. So if I then go back in here and add the rest of the regex characters, now you want to be careful that you never end your regex with the or character, which is the pipe character, or it'll just match everything. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say doesn't match regex. And now what this will do is exclude all of those keywords from my report. And that is something I might want to do. Like if I really just want to see how is my site performing outside of my family's case, and then I could go down here and just see the keywords that have nothing to do with my family's case. So you can apply that to any account and any purpose that you're trying to perform. Now let's close out of this. And let's say I want to just look at certain pages. So here are the pages for my site. And let's say I don't want to look at blog pages. I just want to look at the performance of my guides or my resources. Then I could go in here, select page, matches regex, and I could say resources or guides. And I really like to just wrap things in parentheses. And now I'm only looking at pages that contain guides or resources. Now, if I look at my queries, I'm only going to be viewing queries that drove impressions and or clicks to that section of my site. And if I extend this, then now I can look at just the keywords that are driving impressions and clicks to that section of my site. And if I wanted, I could even compare. I could compare, this is probably going to look a little sad, but I could compare the last 3 months. Last 3 months, year over year. Or I could compare the last 3 months to the previous period. If I click apply, now I'm going to see that breakdown. And here you see the delta in impressions and the delta in clicks. And if I brought in more metrics, I would see more deltas. And this is something that you could then export. You just want to make sure you get as many rows as you can. Unless you're using the API, then you don't have this export limit. But you want to select 500 and then export just to make sure you get at least as much data as you can. So again, that's just a quick overview of how you can use regex in Search Console. Pretty cool.